Good evening, my name is Arlene Herson. The name of the show is Getting to Know You, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Tonight we're going to get to know a gentleman who lights up the entertainment world. He outdazzles the brightest stars with the magnificence of his piano playing, the splendor of his costumes, and the brilliance of his performance. He is none other than Mr. Showmanship himself, the glittering, the glamorous Liberace, and let's get to know him. Welcome.
Thank you, Arlene.
I'm delighted to have you as a guest on my show. And
this is a repeat performance.
Yes, that's right. You were on my show.
It's been a while, though, hasn't it?
5 years ago. I think it
years.
would be nice if we made a pact for every 5 years.
Oh, we got to do it more often than that.
That's a deal.
You know, I was rather surprised to learn that I have been here 13 times out of 17 seasons, which is some kind of a record, they tell me.
When you say here, our audience doesn't know we're here as yet. We're at the Garden State Arts Center in Holmdel, New Jersey, outside on the lawn, outside of Celebrity House, which is a very special place where you're staying now.
Yes.
But I saw you perform, actually here at the Garden State Arts Center. I have seen you perform several times. It never looks like work. You look like you're having an even better time.
Well, I do. I think it's the best time of my life when I'm on the stage. I really love my work, and I have a good time, and it's almost like I'm having a party, you know, and the people have been invited, and we're sharing a good time together. That's the way I feel when I'm performing.
Well, I'm glad I was at your party. But you just broke records at Radio City Music Hall. You've been performing for 40 years. Still breaking records. Music is changing. Your music has really stayed very much the same. Yet you're still breaking records. That must make you feel terrific.
Well, it does make me feel marvelous because I seem to be growing into new generations. And some of my older fans are no longer with me. But then there seem to be new ones taking their place. And I was very surprised at the music hall in Radio City to discover how many people were seeing me live for the first time. I had a cross-section of humanity that was quite astounding. I had a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who mingled during the intermission at Radio City Music Hall, and he wrote an article about what he observed. I had everything from high society to punk rockers. And that's really a cross-section of humanity. And what a marvelous audience they were. I don't think I've ever done an engagement that was such a happening as that one. To play in a theater that's designed with all those facilities at my disposal. I used everything that they could assemble for me. I had the elevators, the blockheads, and the rain, and the steam, and the elevators, and the symphony orchestra, and the double console organs. And it was really terrific.
Yeah, well, okay, when you say the diversity of your audience, I have to be honest with you. The first time that I went to hear Liberace perform, I went a little reluctantly. Now, I've become a fan, so I can tell you that. So if anybody out there hasn't seen you, they're in for a treat.
I think a lot of people come to see me for the first time with a bit of reluctance. And that's a very healthy kind of an audience to have.
Why?
That means you have to work to win them over and make converts out of them. And if they were all dyed-in-the-wool fans, where all you had to do was walk out on a stage and make an appearance, and they all screamed and yelled, I think I wouldn't have lasted that kind of popularity for more than a couple of years. If you notice with some of the rock stars of today, they're very, very good, but they don't have that, they don't seem to last because the public that they attract are so fickle. I love Michael Jackson, you know, for instance. I think he's a great artist, a great performer, multi-talented. He dances and it's all natural, you know what I mean? He really, even Fred Astaire thinks he's terrific, you know what I mean? But then someone comes along like Prince in Purple Rain, you know, and, you know, threatens his popularity. And I've never had anyone threaten my place in show business. It's kind of whether you like it or not, I'm one of a kind, you know what I mean? Nobody has ever really done me completely, you know what I mean? It's just, I seem to be, well, it's just very good to be one of a kind, you know.
I agree, and with all your costumes and all the splendor, I don't see anybody can copy you.
Well, I think the fact is that I was the first, you know, to dare to be different with the costumes and all of that. That's something that just didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, and it kept building and building and building. And then other people began copying the idea of wearing costumes and all that, and it kind of set me out as a kind of a leader, you know, which is a very nice position to enjoy.
Okay, and nobody does it as splendidly as you do. I tell you what, we know how successful you are, how rich you are.
Oh.
Okay, but I know it all didn't happen that way. I'd like to go back after this commercial break and go back to Liberace as a boy, growing up with his family. We're going to take a break right now.
All right.
We're speaking with my very special guest, Liberace. We're here at the Garden State Art Center in Homedale, New Jersey, and we'll be right back with much more after these messages, so please stay right there. We're back. We're with my very special guest, Liberace, and we're here outdoors at the Garden State Art Center. Just before the break, we were talking about how everything really wasn't so easy for you in the beginning. Now you have beautiful homes, you're one of the richest men in the world, expensive cars, you live a very glamorous life, but you grew up, one of 4 children in Milwaukee, lived behind the grocery store where your mother worked sometimes 16, 18 hours a day. There was a lot of love, but not a lot of money. Did you feel deprived in those days?
No, I'll tell you, I was brought up during the Depression years, but I had a very resourceful family. We all pitched in and contributed something. Not always money, but some kind of service. My sister Angie was a built-in babysitter. She was she'd make a few pennies, you know, being babysitter. And she helped my mother in a grocery store. My brother George taught violin at the Northwestern Conservatory. And he also would go to the commission markets in the morning and buy the produce for the store. And my father played the French horn, and he would do band concerts and that sort of thing. And I, at that time, was the youngest member of the family. So my contribution was playing for school dances and so forth. I remember getting my first paycheck was playing for silent movies in school for evening audiences, and I got 50 cents.
Oh my goodness,
a night.
Liberace,
50 cents a night.
You've come a long way since then, my goodness. But even getting back, you mentioned your sister Angie was a babysitter.
Yeah.
Now there are 2 stories about Angie that I know. One was, first of all, she played the piano in the beginning too, because
Yes,
she
she
had
did.
a musical family.
Yes.
But she wasn't wild about playing the piano. Now, when she was babysitting for you in back of the store, you and Angie had kind of an arrangement where your mother thought she was there when she was not.
That's right.
What happened?
Well, Angie said, put me at the piano, and she said, pretend you're practicing for me, you know. And I'd be picking out tunes on the piano, and my mother thought that Angie was at the piano. But Angie was a little bit of a tomboy. She liked to go and play roughhouse with all the kids in the neighborhood. And she was into baseball and all that sort of thing, you know. And one time I got a little bored being all by myself, so I wandered away from not only the piano but from the house, and I was about 2 years old. And I kept wandering farther and farther away, and I wound up at the Wisconsin State Fairgrounds.
Okay, I just want to interrupt you for a second, because during this time when you were 2 years old, and this happened with Angie, we have a picture of what you looked like at 2 when this happened. And I'm glad you're telling the story, because I think it has an important message to parents out there. But I just wanted to interrupt because I want you to know that we're going to show this picture now of you 2 years old. Okay, adorable now, adorable then.
Oh, thank you.
Please go on. What happened?
Well, what happened was I was wandering at the State Fairgrounds during the height of the State Fair, and I was picked up by the police and taken to the Lost and Found, where I was not the only lost child. And they began questioning me. They wanted to know what my name was, and I didn't know my name. My father called me Bulu. So, and they asked me my name, and I said, Bulu is my name. and that didn't make sense. Then they asked me what my father's name was, and my mother used to call my father Kid. And then they asked me what my mother's name was, and my father used to call her Honey. So that's all they had to work on was Honey, Kid, and Bulu. But in the meantime, my parents, frantic, you know, they knew I was lost. They called the police department, and I'll never forget the thrill of being brought home in the sidecar of a motorcycle. Remember the motorcycles that used to have a sidecar? Well, I sat in that sidecar, and I thought that was the most exciting thing that ever happened. And of course, my sister was punished because she let me out of her sight, you know.
Okay, but it was an interesting message, too, that you learned. Your parents then taught you your name, where you lived,
That's
your
right.
father's name, your mother's name, which actually for our audience is a good message.
I
Make
have
sure
a
all your
confession
children.
to make, Arlene.
What's that?
I could not pronounce my last name until I was about 13.
Really?
Really, I said, I can't say that name.
Well, what did you say? How did you pronounce
I couldn't pronounce it, but when I was at 13, I was in junior high school, and the teachers in school taught me how to get rid of my mother's Polish accent and my father's Italian accent. And I had some of the traits of each, which was neither charming nor continental. So I actually went to speech correction classes to get rid of the accent, and that was the first time I learned how to pronounce my name.
Do you remember, or can you tell us how you pronounced Liberace before you learned the right way?
I used to say Liberace. The way it looked on, you know.
Wow.
But in Italian, any syllable that has a vowel in it is pronounced. So it wasn't Liberace, it was Liberace.
Yeah. Well, everybody knows how to pronounce Liberace these days. We're going to take a break, and we're going to learn more about the other things that you learned in life besides just learning how to pronounce your name, which is very important. We're here with my very special guest, Liberace. We're at the Garden State Arts Center, and we'll be right back after these messages. We're back with my very special guest, Liberace. We're here outdoors at the Garden State Arts Center. There is so much to talk about with you, but we were talking about some messages that you give. You give good messages. You give messages of love, messages of believing in yourself. Actually, in your book, you talk about a book called The Magic of Believing, and coincidentally, I interviewed Phyllis Diller a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
She said that book changed her life, and that I understand that you're the person that gave it to her.
Yes.
Now, you do believe in yourself. Obviously, you couldn't do what you do if you didn't. When did you start? Did you always have confidence?
I would say that it was something that I developed after I was on television. You need some kind of assurance. You can't just look in the mirror and say, I believe in myself and have it work. You have to have some kind of assurance from other people that what you're doing is right. And television gave me that, that assurance. And then, of course, if you believe in yourself, you make other people believe in you, then you're on the way, you know, to creating a successful atmosphere in your life. And but the real secret is not just believing, but being honest. You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to know your limitations, and you have to know your values, and you can't just say to yourself, I'm the greatest, and believe it, because you may not be the greatest. You may be the second or third greatest, you know what I mean? So the way it worked for me is I said to myself one day, I said, am I the greatest pianist in the world? And I had to say, no, there are others who are greater. Well, why do you think you're special? You ask yourself these kind of questions, and you have to give honest answers. And then you have to say, in answer to that question, well, I do something that the greatest pianists in the world don't do. Well, what is that? So you just go down the line, and you start taking inventory of your capabilities. And what you do, if it's right and you're honest with yourself, then you're on your way to becoming a success. And it's worked for me, and it's worked for Phyllis Diller, it's worked for a lot of people.
And I have that book, and I'm going to read it. I just bought it. I bought it a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't read it yet, but after seeing what it did for you and Phyllis Diller, boy, I want to know where I'm going from here. But was there ever a time that you doubted that music would be your profession, that you thought you might do something else?
Well, there were times, I suppose, along the way when I wasn't sure, because I really didn't have I didn't have the backup support system that I needed from the public. Before I was on television, for instance, I was what you might call a cafe society entertainer. I played to sophisticated audiences and sophisticated supper clubs. And although they liked what I did and they admired my show, my performance, and sometimes they gave me a standing ovation, a few minutes after I finished that show, I would walk out on the street and I would become an instant non-entity. No one recognized me. Nobody knew who I was. And that bothered me. I wanted people to recognize me from all walks of life. To me, that is real, honest recognition. I now have people say, aren't you afraid to go shopping, or aren't you afraid to go to the movies? I love it. I love to be recognized. I love people to know who I am, and I think that's one of the joys of my profession.
Absolutely. Well, Liberace certainly does not go unnoticed. Was there a time, I mean, Liberace, greatest piano player, greatest entertainer. You've said not the greatest piano player, but the combination of what you do is so great, but your piano playing is the base of it.
That's right, it
now,
is.
There was a time when you were 16 years old, you had an infection, I understand, in one of your fingers, and the doctors wanted to amputate.
That's right.
What
My
happened?
mother wouldn't let them do it. My mother was a lovely, old-fashioned lady, and she had a lot of home remedies. Whenever we kids would get sick, she would come up with some kind of concoction that the doctors didn't know about, you know, and she'd brew up some kind of tea or something, a chamomile or something, and we would get rid of whatever was ailing us. And in the case of my finger, she made a poultice out of rubbing alcohol and some other ingredient. I don't know whether it was bicarbonate of soda or what, but it drew the poison out of my finger, and I didn't have to have it amputated.
Thank goodness. Imagine Liberace.
But you know, sometimes doctors are a little, with all due respect to the medical profession, they're very quick to suggest operations. And I believe that if you really need an operation, get it. But sometimes you can avoid it. And I think that's one instance where I'm glad I avoided it.
Right, and your mother wouldn't let that happen to you. I know that you must miss her very much.
You know, I've had the last rites 3 times in my life. I just live a charmed life. I was once told by a very famous numerologist that I would live to be a ripe old age, because I had this charmed life about me, you know. I was really pronounced dead a couple of times.
I want to talk about those times because I think they're important. We're going to take a break because I want you to be able to tell us. And I think that in reading your book too, and I think not only your charm life, you're charming, but let's take a break and we'll be right back.
Okay, Arlene.
We're here at the Garden State Art Center with Liberace, and we'll be right back after these messages. We're back with my very special guest, Liberace. We're here at the Garden State Art Center in Homedale, New Jersey. Just before the break, you had mentioned being given the last rites. You mentioned 3 times, but actually, while we were talking, I think it was even more than that.
Well, actually, the last rites were due to illnesses. 2 when I was a child. I had pneumonia, rather difficult time with pneumonia both times, almost died. And then as recently as 1963, I had the last rites in Pittsburgh with an acute kidney failure. And 9 specialists gave me up, but I survived. And the other times that you speak of were happenings, right, that could have been disastrous.
Absolutely. There was one time in particular, I want to go back to Pittsburgh, but first there was one time in particular you were invited to the south of France.
That's right, by Ali Khan.
Yes, on Ali Khan's yacht.
Yes.
What happened?
And we went, they all decided on his yacht that we should go for a swim. And they went over the side of the boat, you know, and in the middle of the Mediterranean. And that good of a swimmer I'm not. But I can stay afloat. I have a marvelous capacity for floating. And I was floating and enjoying it, you know, and swimming a little, floating, and all of a sudden the boat disappeared. Everybody thought I was on board, and they took off and left me in the middle of the Mediterranean, which I found out later is infested with sharks and what have you. But fortunately, they came back for me. 45 minutes later, I was in the water alone in the middle of the ocean for 45 minutes with no support system, just floating around.
That must have been terrifying.
I was told by this numerologist, and he said, I'll give you an example how charmed your life is. You could be facing a firing squad, and before they reached the count of 10, somebody would step in and stop it. And so I think maybe that's why I have an attitude about life that I do.
Okay.
Every day is a special day in my life.
Well, you mentioned Pittsburgh. Actually, that was on the day that Kennedy was assassinated.
Yes.
I think it was the day that you almost died.
That's
now,
right.
that was because of inhaling carbon tetrachloride in your dressing room. Is that correct?
Yes. It was a very bad winter storm, a blizzard, in fact, and I wasn't able to go back to the hotel because the roads were closed. And so I spent the night in a dressing room that had been freshly, the rugs had been cleaned, and my costumes were exposed to carbon tetrachloride fumes, and I inhaled these fumes all night long. And if Kennedy, the news of Kennedy's assassination hadn't awakened me, I would have died in my sleep.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. Well, thank heavens for that. You live your life differently now. I know that every day is precious to you, and we only have a minute left. I don't know how to make this longer, but you're a very fortunate man.
Thank you.
You have some. Is there anything that's the most precious to you now with all of your possessions that you have?
Well, I love all the live things that I like, my dogs and my birds, and of course the material things are fun to look at, but I always get very excited over anything living, and of course that includes my friends.
And I hear you love popcorn. Now, you give gifts to all of your friends, all the time. Well, we have some freshly popped popcorn, and it even matches your outfit. All of this is specially for Liberace, and as a special thank you.
Thank you, Arlene. I love to go to movies, and the first thing I do is get the popcorn.
Well, now you watch movies and you can watch it in your house.
I'll be able to have this while I'm watching my soaps. I'm a soap fiend.
Yes, I heard that your soaps are being taped, even right now as we're
In fact, J.C. Penney's is taping my soap so I could do this interview with you.
Well, I'm really glad. Thanks to them and thanks to you for being a guest on my show. I hope that you have enjoyed getting to know Liberace. I know that I certainly have, and that you'll join us again next week. Meantime, good night. It's been a pleasure getting to know you.